The rain battered the hospital windows like a drumroll, each drop echoing the chaos in Sarah Thompson's heart. She stood frozen at her father's bedside, the sterile scent of antiseptic stinging her nose. James Thompson, once a towering figure in their small North Carolina town, now looked frail under the thin hospital blanket, his eyes half open but piercing. The beep of the heart monitor punctuated the silence, a cruel reminder of time slipping away. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm outside. "What if heaven is real, but you've stopped believing?" The question hit her like a lightning bolt. She hadn't set foot in a church in years, not since her mother, Grace, died when Sarah was 15. Her father, a pastor whose sermons echoed Billy Graham's fiery conviction, had always been her anchor. But now, at 28, Sarah was a journalist who chased facts, not faith. And yet, here was her father, James, diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, asking her to confront the one question she'd buried deep. She gripped the cold metal railing of the hospital bed, her knuckles whitening. "Dad, don't talk like that. You're going to be fine," she said, her voice cracking. But the doctor's words from an hour ago, weeks, maybe months, rang louder than her own. James reached for her hand, his fingers trembling. "I've preached about heaven my whole life, Sarah. But it's not just a place. It's family. It's love. Don't let go of that." Tears stung her eyes. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the memory of sitting in a pew as a child, listening to her father quote Billy Graham, "Heaven is real, and it's where we'll be reunited with those we love." But life had chipped away at that certainty, her mother's death, her brother Mike's rejection of faith, her own drift toward skepticism. Now, with her father fading, the question loomed. What if she'd been wrong to let go? The hospital room felt smaller, the walls closing in as memories flooded back. She saw herself at 10, holding her mother's hand at a Billy Graham crusade in Charlotte, the crowd's energy electric, her heart soaring with belief. She saw Mike, once her confidant, turning cold after their mother's car accident, trading pews for physics textbooks. And she saw herself, chasing deadlines in Raleigh, dodging her father's calls because they always ended in sermons. "Sarah," James said again, pulling her back. "Promise me you'll think about it. For you. For Mike." She nodded, unable to speak. The weight of his words settled like a stone in her chest. She glanced at her phone. 2 a.m. Mike hadn't answered her texts about their father's collapse. Typical. Her brother was probably holed up in his Durham apartment, binge-watching Elon Musk interviews or tinkering with some tech gadget, convinced science could solve everything. A nurse entered, checking James's for. "He needs rest," she said softly. Sarah stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights harsh against her tired eyes. She leaned against the wall, pulling up a news article on her phone about Musk's latest Neuralink breakthrough. Mike had raved about it last week, claiming it could rewrite human limits. Sarah scoffed. What good was rewriting limits when her father was running out of time? She typed a quick text to her best friend, Emma Carter, a scientist at a local tech firm. "Dad's worse. Can we talk?" Emma replied instantly, "On my way." Sarah exhaled, grateful for Emma's steady presence. Maybe she'd have answers, or at least a shoulder to lean on. As the rain slowed to a drizzle, Sarah stared out the hospital window, the Asheville skyline blurred in the distance. Her father's question echoed, "What if heaven is real?" She didn't know if she could believe again, but she knew one thing, she couldn't lose him without trying to understand. "Hey, hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," she imagined saying, as if this were one of her video stories for the local paper's YouTube channel. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The thought felt absurd in this sterile hallway, but it grounded her. She'd tell this story, her father's, her family's, her own, one way or another. Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over her untouched coffee. The bustle of nurses and visitors faded into a hum as her mind drifted back to her childhood, to the small town of Black Mountain, North Carolina, where faith wasn't just a belief, it was a way of life. Her father's question from last night, "What if heaven is real, but you've stopped believing?" had cracked open memories she'd long buried. To understand her father now, she had to revisit the girl she used to be. Growing up, Sarah's world revolved around the white-clapboard church where her father, James Thompson, preached. His sermons, steeped in the fire and brimstone conviction of Billy Graham, drew crowds from across Buncombe County. James had a way of making scripture feel alive, like a story unfolding in real time. Sarah, barely 10, would sit in the front pew, her legs swinging, clutching her mother Grace's hand. Grace's smile was warm, her voice soft as she whispered, "Listen close, Sarah. Your daddy's telling you about home." Home was what Grace called heaven, a word that carried weight in their household. Sarah remembered the summer of 2007, when her parents took her and her brother Mike to a Billy Graham crusade in Charlotte. The stadium was a sea of faces, thousands swaying to the choir's hymns, Graham's voice booming through the speakers, "Heaven is not a dream. It's where love never ends." Sarah, wide-eyed, felt something stir in her chest. A certainty that her family, her love for them, was eternal. She'd turned to Mike, 2 years older, expecting to see the same awe. But he was doodling rockets in the program, already drifting toward a different kind of infinity. Grace was the glue that held them together. A schoolteacher with a laugh like wind chimes, she'd read Sarah bedtime stories from the Bible, weaving tales of David and Goliath with lessons about courage. "Faith isn't just believing in God," Grace would say, tucking Sarah in. "It's trusting that love carries you, even through the dark." Those words felt like a promise, until the dark came too soon. When Sarah was 15, Grace died in a car accident on I-40, a sudden collision that stole her mother's light. Sarah could still see the flashing lights of the ambulance, the way her father's shoulders slumped as he told her and Mike the news. James clung to faith, preaching about heaven with renewed fervor, as if he could will Grace's presence back through Scripture. But Sarah felt betrayed. If heaven was real, why did it take her mother? Mike, at 17, turned colder, swapping church for science fairs, declaring, "God's just a story people tell to feel better." The rift between them grew, a silent wound that never healed. Sarah tried to hold on to faith for her father's sake. She'd sit through his sermons, nodding as he quoted Graham, "Family is God's design, a glimpse of heaven on earth." But doubt crept in, a slow poison. By the time she left for college in Raleigh, she was chasing facts. Journalism became her new religion. She wrote stories about local politics, environmental crises, anything grounded in evidence. Mike, meanwhile, moved to Durham, diving into tech and idolizing figures like Elon Musk, whose visions of colonizing Mars and merging minds with machines felt like a rebellion against their father's beliefs. Now, at 28, Sarah felt the weight of those years apart. She sipped her cold coffee, staring at her phone. Still no reply from Mike. She pictured him in his cluttered apartment, surrounded by circuit boards and Musk biographies, dismissing her texts about their father's cancer. The thought stung. Mike had been her protector once, the brother who'd sneak her extra cookies or fix her bike. But after their mother's death, he built a wall she couldn't breach. Her phone buzzed, Emma, her best friend, texting, "Here in 10. Hang in there." Sarah smiled faintly. Emma Carter, a scientist at a tech startup in Research Triangle Park, was the one person who bridged Sarah's past and present. They'd met in college, bonding over late-night study sessions and debates about life's big questions. Emma, raised agnostic, was fascinated by Sarah's faith-soaked upbringing but never pushed her to choose sides. "Science explains how," Emma once said, "but faith tells you why." Sarah envied her clarity. She stood, leaving the cafeteria for the hospital's quiet chapel. The stained glass windows cast a kaleidoscope of colors across the pews, reminding her of her father's church. She sat, closing her eyes, and let a memory surface, her mother's voice reading from Grace's worn Bible, a passage about love enduring all things. Sarah had believed it then, but now? She wasn't sure. Her father's illness, Mike's absence, her own doubts, they felt like a storm she couldn't navigate. A soft creak broke her thoughts. An older woman, a hospital volunteer, sat nearby, offering a gentle smile. "You look like you're carrying the world," she said. Sarah nodded, unsure how to respond. "My husband used to say, when you're lost, go back to where you started. Maybe your heart knows the way." Sarah's throat tightened. Where she started was a little girl in a pew, believing in heaven, in family, in love that lasted forever. Could she find that girl again? Or had she lost her for good? As she left the chapel, her phone vibrated with a voicemail from Mike. Her heart leaped, then sank as she heard his clipped tone, "Sarah, I'm busy. I'll call later." She sighed, pocketing the phone. Maybe the volunteer was right. To face her father's question, she'd have to retrace her steps, back to the faith that shaped her, the family that broke her, and the truth she'd stopped seeking. Sarah paced the hospital corridor, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The rain had stopped, leaving Asheville's skyline sharp against the dawn sky, but the storm inside her was just beginning. Her father, James, slept fitfully in his room, his breathing shallow, each rasp a reminder of the doctor's prognosis, weeks, maybe months. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, Emma, confirming she'd arrived. But it was the absence of Mike's response that gnawed her. Her brother, always one step removed, hadn't even shown up. She found Emma in the hospital lobby, her friend's curly hair pulled into a messy bun, her lab coat swapped for a hoodie and jeans. Emma's hazel eyes softened as she hugged Sarah. "How's he doing?" she asked, her voice steady but warm. "Not great," Sarah admitted, leading Emma to a quiet corner. "They're talking palliative care already. I texted Mike, but, nothing." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the hurt she tried to hide. Emma squeezed her arm. "He'll come around. He's probably just processing." Sarah snorted. "Processing? He's probably glued to some Elon Musk live stream, dreaming of brain chips while Dad's dying." The bitterness surprised her, but it felt true. Mike's obsession with Musk's ventures, Neuralink, SpaceX, the promise of transcending human limits, had grown since their mother's death. It was like he thought technology could rewrite the past, or at least outrun it. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Give him a break, Sarah. He's dealing in his own way. You know how he gets." Sarah sighed, sinking into a vinyl chair. She did know. Mike had always been the dreamer, sketching rockets as a kid while their father preached about angels. After their mother's accident, he'd doubled down, diving into physics and coding, quoting Musk-like scripture, "If we can colonize Mars, we can cheat death." Sarah had tried to bridge the gap, but every call with Mike ended in arguments. His skepticism clashing with her lingering faith, now frayed by doubt. Her phone pinged. A text from Mike, busy with work. "How's Dad?" The curtness stung. She typed a reply, "He's dying, Mike. Get here. But hesitated, deleting it. What was the point? He'd just deflect, like always. Emma leaned forward. "Look, I've got a contact at my lab who's working on cancer trials. Cutting-edge stuff, not quite Neuralink, but promising. I can pull some strings, get your dad on a list." Sarah's chest tightened with a flicker of hope. "You do that?" "Of course," Emma said. "Science can't fix everything, but it can buy time. And time's what you need right now, right?" Sarah nodded, grateful but uneasy. Time for what? To say goodbye? To convince her father heaven wasn't just a story? Or to face her own doubts? She glanced at the cross necklace dangling from Emma's bag, a gift from Sarah years ago, worn more for friendship than faith. Emma's ability to straddle both worlds, science and something softer, felt like a lifeline. The hospital room was dim when they entered, the heart monitor's steady beep the only sound. James stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Sarah," he murmured, then noticed Emma. "Good to see you, kiddo." Emma grinned. "You too, Pastor James. How's the sermon prep going?" He chuckled weakly. "Not much preaching left in me. Just praying." His gaze shifted to Sarah, heavy with meaning. "For you. For Mike. For us to be a family again." Sarah's throat closed. She wanted to promise they would be, but Mike's absence loomed like a shadow. As if on cue, her phone rang, Mike's name on the screen. She stepped into the hall, heart pounding, and answered. "Where are you?" she snapped, unable to hold back. "Durham," Mike said, his voice clipped. "Work's crazy. I'm trying to get there, okay? Dad's asking for you, Mike." She stopped, the word dying too heavy to say. "He needs us. Both of us." Mike sighed, static crackling through the line. "Look, I'm working on something big. A Neuralink-inspired project. It could change everything, maybe even help Dad." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "A brain chip? Are you serious? Dad's not some sci-fi experiment." "It's not just a chip, Sarah," Mike shot back. "It's about enhancing life, beating disease. Musk's team is proving it's possible. Why cling to prayers when we can do something? Because he believes in them." Sarah's voice rose, drawing a nurse's glance. "Dad's not your lab rat. He's talking about heaven, Mike, not your tech utopia." "Heaven?" Mike scoffed. "That's just Dad's way of coping. You used to see through that, too." The words cut deep, slicing into the doubt Sarah had carried since their mother's death. She remembered Mike's face at Grace's funeral, stony as their father spoke of her in heaven. Mike had whispered to Sarah later, "If God's real, why'd he take Mom?" She hadn't had an answer then, and she didn't now. "I'm coming tomorrow," Mike said finally. "But think about what I said. Science can help him. Faith won't." He hung up, leaving Sarah staring at the blank screen. Her chest ached, torn between anger and guilt. Was Mike right? Was she clinging to her father's beliefs out of habit, afraid to face reality? Or was there something to James's faith, something she'd lost along the way? Back in the room, Emma was chatting with James, her laughter a brief light in the gloom. Sarah forced a smile, but her father's eyes met hers, searching. "Did you talk to Mike?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, voice soft. "He's trying." James nodded, his hand reaching for hers. "Keep trying, Sarah. Family's worth it. Heaven's worth it." She squeezed his hand, her heart a battlefield of faith and doubt. Maybe Emma's offer of a trial could buy time. Maybe Mike's tech dreams held answers. Or maybe, just maybe, her father's words about heaven were the truth she needed to find. Sarah's boots crunched on the gravel outside the hospital as she followed Emma to her beat-up Subaru, the early morning air crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Asheville's Blue Ridge Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist, a reminder of the world beyond her father's hospital room. After last night's argument with Mike, Sarah felt like she was teetering on a tightrope, one side pulling her toward her father's faith, the other toward her brother's obsession with science. Emma's offer to explore experimental cancer treatments was a lifeline, but it came with its own weight. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked, sliding into the passenger seat. The car smelled faintly of coffee and lab chemicals, a mix that screamed Emma. Emma started the engine, her eyes bright despite the early hour. "Absolutely. My lab's working with some folks at Duke on immunotherapy trials. It's not Musk-level sci-fi, but it's cutting edge. Could give your dad a fighting chance." Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her phone, where Mike's last text, "Science can help him," still lingered. She wanted to believe Emma, but doubt gnawed at her. What if this was just another false hope, like the prayers she'd whispered after her mother's accident? She glanced at Emma, who was humming softly to a country song on the radio, her cross necklace glinting in the sunlight. How did Emma balance it all, logic and something more? The drive to Research Triangle Park took them past rolling hills and small towns, the kind of places where Sarah's father, James, had preached for decades. She could almost hear his voice, echoing Billy Graham's cadence, "Hope is not a dream, it's a promise." But hope felt fragile now, like a candle flickering in a storm. Emma's lab was a sleek, glass-walled building, a far cry from the rustic churches of Sarah's childhood. Inside, the air hummed with the whir of machines and the chatter of scientists. Emma led Sarah to a conference room, where monitors displayed charts of T-cell therapies and molecular models. It reminded Sarah of the SpaceX launches Mike obsessed over, all gleaming tech and big promises. A framed quote on the wall caught her eye, "The important thing is not to stop questioning." Albert Einstein. Mike would love that. "Okay, here's the deal," Emma said, pulling up a file on her laptop. "There's a trial for non-small cell lung cancer, like your dad's. It's experimental, but the early data's promising. Some patients see months, even years," added. "I can get his records to the team today." Sarah's heart leaped, a spark of hope igniting. Months? That's something. She pictured her father back in his garden, tending his roses, or preaching to his small congregation. Time. It wasn't a cure, but it was a chance. Emma's smile faded slightly. "There's a catch. It's not covered by insurance, could cost a fortune. And there's no guarantee he'll qualify. His condition's advanced." The spark dimmed. Sarah's journalist's salary barely covered her rent, and her father's savings were modest. She thought of Mike, who'd bragged about his tech startup's funding. Could he help? Or would he push some Neuralink-inspired pipe dream instead? "I'll figure out the money," she said, more to herself than Emma. "Just, get him in." Emma nodded, typing rapidly. "I'll make it happen. But, Sarah, you should talk to Mike. He's got connections in the tech world. Maybe he knows someone who can help with funding." Sarah's jaw tightened. Mike, with his Musk-worshipping, "science is everything" mantra, was the last person she wanted to ask. Their fight last night had left a bruise, his dismissal of their father's faith felt like a betrayal. But for James, she'd swallow her pride. Back in the car, Emma turned off the radio, her voice soft. "You know, I lost my dad when I was in grad school. Cancer, too. I threw myself into work, thinking I could outsmart it. But sometimes, science isn't enough. I started praying again, not because I believed, but because it felt like talking to him." Sarah stared out the window, the hills blurring past. "I used to pray. After Mom died, I begged God to bring her back. When he didn't, I stopped." Her voice wavered. "Now Dad's talking about heaven, and I don't know what to believe." Emma reached over, squeezing her hand. "You don't have to know yet. Just keep asking questions. That's what keeps us going." The words echoed the Einstein quote, and Sarah felt a flicker of connection. Not just to Emma, but to something bigger. Maybe questions, not answers, were the bridge between her father's faith and Mike's science. Back at the hospital, Sarah found James awake, flipping through a worn copy of Billy Graham's Peace with God. His face lit up when he saw her. "You look like you've been scheming," he teased, his voice weak but warm. Sarah forced a smile. "Emma's looking into a treatment trial. It could help." James's eyes softened. "That's good, Sarah. But don't forget, hope's not just in medicine. It's here." He tapped his chest, then pointed upward. "And there." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Mike, got a lead on a new treatment. Neuralink-based tech, could stabilize Dad's condition. Call me. Sarah's stomach twisted. There it was, Mike's tech obsession rearing its head again. A new treatment sounded promising, but the word Neuralink set her on edge. Was he serious about wiring their father's brain to some experimental device? The hope Emma had sparked flickered, overshadowed by a new tension. Mike's solution felt like a rejection of everything James stood for: faith, family, the promise of heaven. Sarah pocketed her phone, her mind racing. Emma's trial offered a chance, but Mike's idea felt like a gamble with her father's soul. She looked at James, his eyes searching hers, and felt the weight of his question from the night before. Heaven or science, which would she choose? Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor of her father's house in Black Mountain, the late afternoon sun filtering through lace curtains, casting golden patterns on the hardwood. The hospital had sent James home for a few days to rest, a term that felt like a cruel euphemism for waiting to die. With Mike still in Durham and Emma back at her lab, Sarah was alone, sorting through her father's belongings to make his remaining time comfortable. The task felt like excavating her own past, each item a shard of memory. She opened a cedar chest in the living room, the scent of old wood and lavender stirring something deep. Beneath a stack of faded hymnals and James's sermon notes, she found it, her mother's Bible, its leather cover worn soft, the edges frayed from years of Grace's touch. Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't seen it since she was 15, since the night before her mother's accident, when Grace had read to her from Psalms, her voice steady as a lullaby, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." Sarah traced the embossed cross on the cover, her fingers trembling. The Bible felt like a relic, heavy with her mother's presence. She opened it, half expecting Grace's warmth to spill out. Instead, she found pages filled with notes in her mother's neat script, verses underlined, margins crowded with reflections. One page, marked with a faded ribbon, held a quote from Billy Graham: "Heaven is the place of perfect love, where families are reunited forever." Below it, Grace had written, for Sarah and Mike, "Never forget where home is." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. She could see her mother now, sitting at the kitchen table, her glasses slipping down her nose as she read Graham's sermons aloud. Grace had been the heart of their family, the one who made James's firebrand faith feel gentle, who taught Sarah and Mike that love was the bridge between earth and eternity. After her death, that bridge had crumbled. Mike turned to science, Sarah to skepticism, and James to preaching harder, as if words could fill the void. A memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. Sarah was 12, curled up on the porch swing with Grace, fireflies blinking in the summer dusk. They'd been listening to a cassette of Billy Graham's 1999 crusade in Indianapolis, his voice crackling through the old boombox: "Family is God's gift, a taste of heaven's joy." Grace had hugged Sarah close, whispering, "You, Mike, and your daddy, you're my heaven right here." Sarah had believed it then, believed love could last forever. But when Grace died, that belief shattered, leaving Sarah to wonder if heaven was just a story to soothe the grieving. She flipped through the Bible, finding more of her mother's notes. On a page from Corinthians, Grace had underlined, "Love never fails," and written, "When I doubt, I hold on to this. God's love, our family's love, it's eternal." Sarah's chest tightened. Doubt. Her mother had doubted, too. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Grace, with her unshakable warmth, had wrestled with the same questions Sarah now faced. Another note caught her eye, tucked into the book of John. Billy Graham said, "Heaven is real because God keeps his promises. I believe it, even when it hurts. For my babies, I pray they find it too." The words hit Sarah like a wave, pulling her back to the hospital, to her father's whispered question, "What if heaven is real?" Grace had believed in it, not just as a place, but as a promise of reunion, of love enduring beyond death. Could Sarah believe that now, with her father slipping away? She clutched the Bible to her chest, the room blurring through tears. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock, a sound that had lulled her to sleep as a child. She could almost hear Grace's voice, feel her hand smoothing Sarah's hair. The memory was a lifeline, but it also deepened her guilt. She'd spent years running from her mother's faith, chasing facts as a journalist, building walls against the pain of loss. Now, with James's time running out, those walls felt like a prison. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back. A text from Emma, trial paperwork's in motion. Need Dad's latest scans. You okay? Sarah typed a quick reply, I'm fine, thanks. Scans tomorrow. But she wasn't fine. The hope of Emma's trial clashed with the weight of her mother's words, stirring a storm inside her. She wanted to believe in science, in the chance to save her father. But Grace's Bible, with its promise of heaven, tugged at something deeper, something she'd buried with her mother. Another text came through, this time from Mike, found a Neuralink trial that could help Dad. Brain stimulation for pain, maybe more. Talk tonight. Sarah's stomach churned. Mike's obsession with Elon Musk's tech was relentless, and the idea of wiring their father's brain felt like a violation of everything Grace and James stood for. Yet, the word help sparked a flicker of hope, quickly doused by doubt. What if it was too late? What if Mike's tech dreams were just another way to avoid facing their father's mortality? Sarah set the Bible on the coffee table, its pages open to Grace's note about heaven. The sun had dipped below the mountains, painting the room in twilight. She felt caught between two worlds, her mother's faith, etched in ink and memory, and her brother's science, promising miracles but no promises. For the first time, she wondered if she could find a way to hold both, to honor Grace's love and James's hope without losing herself. As she stood to check on her father, the weight of the Bible lingered in her hands, a quiet challenge to rediscover the girl who once believed in forever. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading flowers, a bouquet of roses wilting on the windowsill. Sarah sat by her father's bedside, the soft beep of the heart monitor a steady counterpoint to the storm brewing inside her. James dozed, his face pale under the fluorescent lights, a worn Bible resting on his chest. Sarah's fingers still tingled from the memory of her mother's Bible, its pages filled with Grace's notes about heaven and love. But that fragile connection to her past was about to be tested. Mike had finally arrived, his sneakers squeaking as he entered the room. His dark hair was disheveled, his hoodie emblazoned with a SpaceX logo, a silent declaration of where his loyalties lay. Sarah's relief at seeing him was quickly overshadowed by irritation. He'd taken 2 days to show up, and now he stood there, scrolling on his phone, as if their father's life wasn't slipping away. Nice of you to make it, Sarah said, her voice low but sharp. Mike glanced up, his jaw tight. I was working, Sarah. Not all of us can drop everything for. He stopped, eyeing their father. How's he doing? Dying, Sarah snapped, the word cutting through the air. Where were you? Chasing Musk's next big idea. Mike's eyes narrowed. I was trying to help. I found a trial, Neuralink-based, brain stimulation for pain management. It could stabilize Dad's symptoms, maybe even slow the cancer's effects on his nervous system. Sarah's heart stuttered, a flicker of hope igniting despite her anger. She thought of Emma's immunotherapy trial, a more grounded option, but Mike's words carried a strange allure. Could technology really buy their father time? She pushed the thought aside, her mother's Bible still heavy in her mind. You want to turn Dad into a science experiment? He's a pastor, Mike. He believes in prayer, not brain chips. Mike scoffed, pocketing his phone. Prayer. That's your plan? Sit here and hope for a miracle while Dad wastes away. Elon's team is rewriting what's possible, Sarah. This isn't sci-fi, it's real. The room felt smaller, the air thick with tension. Sarah stood, her hands clenched. This is about Dad, not your tech hero. He's talking about heaven, about family. You'd know that if you'd been here. Mike's face hardened. Heaven's a fairy tale, Sarah. You used to get that. After Mom died, you stopped believing, too. Or are you just pretending for Dad's sake? The words hit like a slap, dragging up the pain of their mother's death. Sarah remembered the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, begging God to bring Grace back, only to feel abandoned. Mike had been there, too, his own grief turning to anger, his faith replaced by equations and Elon Musk's promises of a better future. But now, with their father fading, Sarah felt a pull toward the faith she'd left behind, a pull Mike seemed determined to sever. "Stop it," she hissed, glancing at James, who stirred but didn't wake. "Dad spent his life preaching hope, like Billy Graham. He believes we'll see Mom again. You're spitting on that." Mike stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Billy Graham? He sold dreams to desperate people. I'm offering something real. A chance to save Dad, not pray for his soul while he suffers." Sarah's vision blurred with tears, her anger boiling over. "You think your tech can replace what Dad believes? What Mom believed? You're so obsessed with Musk, you've forgotten what family means. Enough." James's voice, weak but firm, cut through their argument. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. Her father's eyes were open, filled with a mix of pain and sorrow. "You're my children," he said, his breath ragged. "Don't tear each other apart. Not now." Guilt crashed over Sarah like a wave. She sank into her chair, her face burning. Mike looked away, his hands shoved in his pockets. The room was silent, save for the heart monitor's relentless beep. James reached for Sarah's hand, then Mike's, his grip frail but determined. "I failed you both," he whispered. "I couldn't keep us together after your mother." "No, Dad," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "You didn't fail. We did." Mike shifted, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Sarah thought he'd speak, maybe apologize. But he turned toward the window, staring at the Asheville skyline, his silence louder than words. A soft knock broke the tension. A nurse entered, her smile gentle. "Mr. Thompson, I've got a story for you." She recounted a patient down the hall, a woman with lung cancer who'd gone into remission against all odds. "Sometimes, miracles happen," she said, adjusting James's fore. "Keep the faith." Sarah's chest tightened, the nurse's words a spark of hope in the gloom. She glanced at James, who nodded faintly, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Faith," he murmured. "That's what carries us." But as the nurse left, the spark faded. Mike's phone buzzed, and he checked it, his face lighting up. "The trial," he said, almost to himself. "They're fast-tracking it. I need to make a call." He stepped into the hall, leaving Sarah alone with their father and the weight of their argument. She looked at James, his eyes drifting shut, the Bible still clutched to his chest. The hope of the nurse's story clashed with the sting of Mike's words, pulling Sarah back into the storm. Could she trust Emma's trial, or even Mike's tech dreams, to save her father? Or was James right, that faith, not science, was the answer? The rift between her and Mike felt wider than ever, a chasm threatening to swallow what little family they had left. The old pickup truck rumbled along the Blue Ridge Parkway, its engine groaning as Sarah navigated the winding curves. The Appalachian Mountains rose around them, their peaks dusted with early autumn gold, the air crisp with the scent of pine and fallen leaves. James sat in the passenger seat, a wool blanket draped over his frail frame, his oxygen tank humming softly at his feet. The hospital had allowed a brief discharge, a rare window of freedom, and Sarah had seized it. She was taking her father to Montreat, North Carolina, Billy Graham's hometown, hoping the familiar landscape might rekindle his spirit, and maybe hers. Sarah glanced at James, his eyes fixed on the rolling hills, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Feels like going home," he said, his voice thin but warm. "Billy used to say these mountains were God's cathedral." She nodded, her hands tight on the steering wheel. The idea had come to her after finding her mother's Bible, its pages filled with Graham's words about heaven. Montreat, where Graham had lived and prayed, felt like a pilgrimage, a chance to reconnect with the faith that had shaped her family, before loss and doubt tore them apart. Mike had scoffed when she told him her plan, muttering about wasting time on nostalgia instead of pursuing his Neuralink trial. He'd stayed behind in Durham, leaving Sarah to face this journey alone with their father. The road dipped, revealing a valley where mist clung to the treetops like a veil. Sarah's chest ached with a mix of awe and grief. This was the North Carolina of her childhood. Church picnics, her mother's laughter, her father's sermons echoing through small-town sanctuaries. Now, with James's cancer advancing, every mile felt like a countdown. They stopped at a scenic overlook, the wind carrying the faint sound of a distant stream. Sarah helped James out of the truck, steadying him as he leaned on his cane. His breathing was labored, but his eyes sparkled as he took in the view. "Your mother loved this," he said, gesturing to the mountains. "Said it was proof God's an artist." Sarah smiled, her throat tight. She'd have loved this trip. She pictured Grace, her apron dusted with flour, planning family outings like this one. The memory was a spark of hope, a reminder of the love that had once bound them. James pointed to a trailhead nearby, a narrow path winding into the woods. "There's a chapel up that way. Billy used to walk there, pray. Want to see it?" Sarah hesitated. The path looked steep, and James was fragile. But his eyes held a quiet determination, the same fire she'd seen in his pulpit days. "Okay," she said, looping her arm through his. "But we go slow." The trail was rough, roots twisting underfoot, but the forest was alive with color, red maples, golden hickories, the crunch of leaves under their boots. Sarah's heart pounded, not just from the climb but from the weight of being here, with her father, chasing a piece of their past. They reached a small stone chapel, its wooden door weathered but sturdy, a simple cross carved above it. Inside, the air was cool, smelling of cedar and thyme. A single stained glass window cast a soft glow, painting the pews in hues of blue and gold. James sank onto a pew, catching his breath. Sarah sat beside him, her eyes drawn to a plaque quoting Billy Graham, "Heaven is not far away, it's where love lives forever." The words echoed her mother's notes, stirring a longing she couldn't name. She wanted to believe them, to feel the certainty she'd known as a child. But doubt lingered, sharpened by Mike's words, "Heaven's a fairy tale." "Sarah," James said, his voice soft but steady, "I brought you here for a reason. This place, it's where I found my calling, years ago, listening to Billy preach. He said faith isn't about knowing everything, it's about trusting what you can't see." Sarah's chest tightened. "Dad, I want to believe. I do. But after Mom, it's hard. And Mike, he's so sure science is the answer." James nodded, his eyes gentle. "Mike's searching, just like you. But faith and science, they're not enemies. They're both ways to find truth. Your mother knew that." The words offered a flicker of hope, a bridge between the worlds tearing Sarah apart. She thought of Emma, blending logic and faith, and wondered if she could do the same. Maybe this chapel, this moment, was a step toward understanding. As they left the chapel, Sarah spotted a small bookstore nearby, its sign reading Montreat Christian Books. Inside, she found a dusty cassette of a Billy Graham sermon from the 1980s, its cover faded but intact. On impulse, she bought it, hoping it might hold answers, or at least comfort. Back in the truck, she played it, Graham's voice filling the cab, "Family is God's gift, a glimpse of heaven on earth." James closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. But the hope faded as they drove back toward Asheville. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mike, "Neuralink trial approved for Dad. Need your sign-off. It's now or never." Her stomach churned. The sermon's warmth clashed with Mike's cold urgency, reigniting the tension. Could she agree to a treatment that felt like a betrayal of her father's faith? Or was she clinging to nostalgia, risking his life for a memory of heaven? As the mountains faded in the rearview mirror, Sarah felt the weight of the choice ahead. The road trip had brought her closer to her father, to Grace's memory, to the faith she'd lost. But Mike's message was a reminder: the journey was far from over, and the chasm between faith and science was widening. The diner in Montreat smelled of fried eggs and strong coffee, its checkered floor and vinyl booths a throwback to the North Carolina of Sarah's childhood. She and James sat at a corner table, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. The road trip to Billy Graham's hometown had left Sarah's heart full yet heavy, the echo of Graham's sermon still ringing in her ears: family is God's gift, a glimpse of heaven on earth. But Mike's text about the Neuralink trial loomed like a storm cloud, threatening to unravel the fragile peace she'd found. James sipped his tea, his hands unsteady but his eyes bright. "This place hasn't changed in 30 years, he said, nodding toward a jukebox in the corner. "Your mother and I used to come here after church. She'd play Amazing Grace every time." Sarah smiled, picturing Grace slipping coins into the jukebox, her laughter filling the diner. The memory was a balm, but it couldn't erase the tension gnawing at her. Mike's trial proposal felt like a betrayal of her father's faith, yet the hope of extending his life was hard to dismiss. She glanced at her phone, the screen dark, and wished for clarity. A woman approached their table, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun, her eyes warm behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a sweater embroidered with a small cross, and her presence carried a quiet authority. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice soft but confident. "I overheard you mention Billy Graham. I'm Dr. Rachel Evans, a theologian. I studied his work for years." Sarah hesitated, then gestured to an empty chair. "Sure. I'm Sarah, and this is my dad, James. He's a big fan of Billy's." James's face lit up. "A theologian? Well, now, that's a gift. I've been preaching Billy's word since I was young. What brought you here?" Rachel smiled, settling in. "Montreat's my home base. Billy's legacy is everywhere here. His faith, his focus on love and family. I teach at the college, trying to keep that alive." She paused, her gaze settling on Sarah. "You look like you're carrying a lot. Care to share?" Sarah's guard went up, but something in Rachel's eyes, kind, not prying, made her open up. "My dad's sick," she said, her voice low. "Cancer. My brother thinks some high-tech trial, like Neuralink, can help. But Dad, he's all about faith, about heaven. I'm stuck in the middle." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Faith versus science. It's an old tension. Billy grappled with it, too, you know. He once said, science seeks the how, faith seeks the why. Both are part of God's truth." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. "You're saying they don't have to fight?" "Not at all," Rachel said. "Science can heal the body, faith heals the soul. Think of it like a house, science builds the walls, but faith makes it a home. Billy believed love, especially family love, ties them together." The word sparked a flicker of hope in Sarah's chest, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She thought of her mother's Bible, Grace's notes about love enduring all things. Could Rachel be right? Could she find a way to honor both her father's faith and Mike's drive for a cure? The idea felt like a bridge over the chasm between her and her brother. James reached for Sarah's hand, his grip weak but warm. "Listen to her, Sarah. Your mother would've. Grace always said love was bigger than any question." Rachel's eyes softened. "Sounds like your mother knew what Billy preached, that heaven isn't just a place, but a promise of love's reunion. Science, like Elon Musk's work, pushes boundaries, but it's love that gives it meaning." Sarah's heart raced. Elon Musk's name, coming from Rachel, felt jarring yet grounding. Maybe Mike's obsession wasn't entirely at odds with their father's beliefs. The thought was a lifeline, a way to imagine reconciliation. Not just with Mike, but with her own doubts. But the hope dimmed as her phone buzzed again. Another text from Mike: "Trial needs approval by tomorrow. Dad's scans look bad. We're running out of time." The words hit like a punch, reigniting the tension. Sarah's mind spun. Rachel's wisdom offered a new lens, but Mike's urgency pulled her back to reality. Signing off on a Neuralink-inspired trial felt like stepping away from her father's faith, from Grace's legacy. Yet refusing it could mean losing James sooner. Rachel seemed to sense her turmoil. "You don't have to choose one side," she said gently. "Ask yourself what love demands, for your dad, your brother, yourself. That's where you'll find your answer." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. The diner's jukebox kicked on, playing Amazing Grace, and James's eyes glistened. "Your mother's here," he whispered, his voice breaking. Sarah squeezed his hand, the music wrapping around them like a memory. For a moment, she felt Grace's presence, a spark of hope that love could guide her through this storm. As they left the diner, the mountains glowed under a pink sunset, their beauty a quiet promise. Rachel handed Sarah her card, saying, "Call me if you need to talk. You're not alone in this." Sarah tucked it away, grateful but overwhelmed. The road back to Asheville stretched ahead, and with it, a choice that felt impossible. Mike's trial loomed, a scientific gamble that clashed with the faith Rachel had rekindled. Sarah glanced at James, humming softly to the hymn, and wondered if love could truly bridge the gap, or if the next step would tear them further apart. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The hospital room was a cocoon of dim light and hushed sounds, the heart monitor's steady beep a cruel metronome. Sarah sat by her father's bedside, her hands clasped tightly, as if holding on could stop time. James's breathing was shallow, his face gaunt under the oxygen mask, the cancer stealing more of him each day. The trip to Montreat had lifted his spirits, but now, back in Asheville, reality crashed in. Sarah's phone burned in her pocket, Mike's latest text: "Trial needs approval by tomorrow," a ticking bomb. The wisdom of Dr. Rachel Evans, with her talk of balancing faith and science, felt like a distant echo against the urgency of now. Mike burst into the room, his SpaceX hoodie wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "I got the trial details," he said, holding up his phone like a trophy. "It's not just pain management, Sarah. This Neuralink-based tech could slow the tumor's impact on Dad's brain. It's experimental, but it's a shot." Sarah's stomach twisted, a mix of hope and dread. She glanced at James, who stirred but didn't open his eyes. "Mike, this isn't some startup pitch. It's Dad. He's barely strong enough for chemo, let alone brain tech. What if it makes things worse?" Mike's jaw clenched. "Worse than dying. I've read the data, Sarah. Neuralink's trials are showing results, patients with neurological issues stabilizing. Elon's team is pushing boundaries you can't even imagine." "Elon again," Sarah snapped, her voice rising despite the quiet room. "You think Musk's some savior? Dad believes in heaven, not silicon chips. You're asking me to sign off on something that feels wrong." Mike stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Wrong? Clinging to fairy tales while Dad suffers. That's wrong. You're so stuck in Mom's Bible and Dad's sermons, you're blind to what's possible. Science can give him time. What's faith giving him? False hope." The words cut deeper than Sarah expected, slicing into the doubt she'd carried since finding her mother's Bible. She thought of Grace's notes, her belief in a heavenly reunion, and Rachel's words about love bridging faith and science. But Mike's scorn made her feel small, like the girl who'd stopped praying after her mother's death. "You don't get it," she said, her voice trembling. Dad's faith is what keeps him going. It's not false, it's real to him. Real? Mike scoffed, pacing the room. Like heaven was real for Mom? Where was God when she died, Sarah? I'm trying to save Dad, not pray for a miracle that won't come. Sarah's vision blurred with tears, the room shrinking around their argument. She wanted to scream, to shake Mike until he saw their father's heart, not just his failing body. But before she could respond, a weak cough broke the silence. James's eyes fluttered open, his gaze heavy with pain. Stop, he rasped, pulling off the oxygen mask. Both of you. Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't realized he'd heard. Dad, I'm sorry, she said, rushing to his side. Mike froze, his face pale. James's hand trembled as he reached for them. You're breaking my heart, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I taught you to love each other, not fight. If this is my last lesson, listen, family is all we have. Guilt crashed over Sarah, her anger dissolving into shame. She squeezed James's hand, feeling the fragility of his bones. Mike looked away, his hands shoved in his pockets, but his shoulders slumped, betraying his own regret. A soft knock interrupted the moment. Emma slipped into the room, her lab coat swapped for a sweater, her cross necklace glinting faintly. Hey, she said, her voice a calm anchor. I got the trial paperwork through. Your dad's eligible for the immunotherapy study. It's not a cure, but it could ease his symptoms, maybe give you more time. Sarah's chest lifted, a spark of hope piercing the gloom. Emma's trial felt less invasive than Mike's Neuralink gamble, more in line with James's quiet faith. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice thick. That means everything. Emma knelt beside James, her smile gentle. Pastor James, you mind if I pray with you? I'm not great at it, but I figure you're a pro. James chuckled weakly, a light in his eyes. I'd like that, Emma. She took his other hand, bowing her head, and murmured a simple prayer for peace and strength. Sarah joined in silently, the words unfamiliar but comforting, like a half-remembered song. For a moment, the room felt lighter, the rift between her and Mike softened by Emma's presence. But as Emma left, promising to follow up, the tension returned. Mike's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, his face hardening. The Neuralink team needs an answer tonight, he said, his voice flat. I'm not giving up, Sarah. This could be Dad's only shot. Sarah's hope flickered, overshadowed by the weight of his words. She looked at James, now drifting back to sleep, his Bible clutched to his chest. The memory of Montreat, of Rachel's wisdom, clashed with Mike's relentless push for science. Emma's trial offered a middle ground, but Mike's urgency felt like a challenge to everything her father, and her mother, believed. The breaking point had come, and Sarah felt alone, caught between her brother's future and her father's faith. As the heart monitor beeped on, Sarah's mind raced. Could she trust Emma's trial to honor her father's wishes? Or was Mike right, was science their only hope? The choice loomed, a cliff edge she wasn't ready to face. The hospital room was bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Sarah sat by her father's bedside, her eyes burning from exhaustion and unshed tears. James slept fitfully, his breathing uneven, the oxygen mask fogging with each exhale. The weight of her argument with Mike still hung heavy, his insistence on the Neuralink trial clashing with Emma's immunotherapy offer and their father's quiet faith. Sarah felt like she was drowning in choices, none of them clear. Needing a moment of solace, she pulled her mother's Bible from her bag, its worn leather a tether to Grace's memory. She opened it, her fingers brushing the pages where Grace's handwriting had left its mark. The Bible fell open to a section of John, where a folded letter slipped out, its edges yellowed but intact. Sarah's heart stuttered. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's, the looping script as familiar as a childhood lullaby. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, the faint scent of lavender rising from the paper, pulling her back to Black Mountain summers. My dearest Sarah and Mike, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, but I need you to know something. I wasn't always sure about heaven. After I lost a baby before you too, I doubted God, doubted everything. The pain was a darkness I couldn't escape. But Billy Graham's words pulled me through. Heaven is real because God keeps his promises. I found peace believing we'd all be together again, you, Mike, your father, and my lost little one. Hold on to love, my babies. It's the bridge to eternity. Sarah's breath caught, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her mother had lost a child. The revelation was a shock, a secret Grace had carried alone. The image of her mother, so steady and warm, wrestling with doubt shook Sarah to her core. Grace had faced the same questions Sarah now grappled with, questions of faith, loss, and what lay beyond. Yet she'd found her way back through Billy Graham's teachings, through the promise of a heavenly reunion. The room seemed to pulse with Grace's presence, the air thick with memory. Sarah could almost hear her mother's voice, reading from this Bible, her words weaving love and faith into every story. The letter was a lifeline, a spark of hope that cut through the tension of the past days. Grace had doubted, yet believed. Could Sarah do the same? The thought of her mother waiting in some eternal place, with a child Sarah had never known, made her heart ache with both grief and longing. She looked at James, his face peaceful in sleep, and felt a surge of love. His faith, rooted in Graham's teachings, wasn't just blind hope, it was a choice, like Grace's, to trust in something bigger. Sarah clutched the letter, its words a beacon in her storm of doubt. Maybe heaven wasn't a place she had to prove, but a promise she could choose to hold, for her father, for her mother, for herself. The door creaked open, and Emma slipped in, her face soft with concern. "You okay?" she whispered, noticing the tears. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "I found this," she said, holding up the letter. "Mom wrote it. She lost a baby before us. She doubted, too, but she believed in heaven. Because of Billy Graham." Emma's eyes widened, and she sat beside Sarah, reading the letter over her shoulder. "Wow," she murmured. "That's powerful. She sounds like she knew how to love through the hard stuff." "Yeah," Sarah said, her voice thick. "She did." The hope in Grace's words felt like a gift, reminder that love could endure even the deepest pain. Emma's presence, her quiet strength, added to the warmth, a moment of light in the hospital's gloom. But the light flickered as Sarah's phone buzzed. A new text from Mike, signed the Neuralink papers. "Trial starts tomorrow unless you stop it. Dad deserves a chance." Her stomach dropped, the hope shattered by a fresh wave of tension. Mike had acted without her, bypassing their father's wishes, her wishes. The letter's promise of love and reunion clashed with Mike's relentless push for science, a betrayal that stung deeper than their earlier fights. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped the letter. Grace's words about heaven felt like a call to honor her father's faith, but Mike's actions pulled her toward a future she couldn't trust. The hospital room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield. She looked at James, his Bible still clutched in his sleep, and felt the weight of her mother's legacy. Grace had found peace in faith. Could Sarah do the same, or would Mike's choice force her to confront a truth she wasn't ready for? Emma touched her arm, her voice gentle. "You don't have to decide tonight. Just be with him. That's what your mom would want." Sarah nodded, tears falling anew. She tucked the letter back into the Bible, its words a fragile anchor. The revelation of Grace's loss and faith had shaken her, offering hope but also a challenge, to choose love over doubt, family over fear. But Mike's unilateral decision loomed, a new high point of tension that threatened to unravel everything. As the heart monitor beeped on, Sarah felt caught in a crucible, her mother's words on one side, her brother's actions on the other, and her father's life hanging in the balance. The hospital room glowed with the soft amber of dawn, the first light creeping through the blinds to warm James's pale face. Sarah sat by his bedside, her mother's Bible open in her lap, Grace's letter tucked inside like a sacred relic. The revelation of her mother's lost child and renewed faith had shifted something in Sarah, a quiet resolve taking root. But Mike's text, signed the Neuralink papers, still burned in her mind, a reckless act that felt like a betrayal of their father's beliefs. The weight of the choice before her was crushing: honor James's faith or grasp at Mike's scientific gamble. Sarah's eyes traced the lines of Grace's letter: hold on to love, my babies. It's the bridge to eternity. The words, steeped in Billy Graham's promise of a heavenly reunion, felt like a call to action. James had always taught her that faith was a leap, not a certainty, a choice to trust in love, in family, in something beyond the visible. Mike's trial, with its wires and tech, seemed to mock that leap, reducing her father to a problem to be solved. Her phone buzzed again, Mike, calling this time. She stepped into the hall, her heart pounding, and answered. "What were you thinking?" she hissed, keeping her voice low. "You signed Dad up without me?" Mike's tone was defiant but strained. "I had to, Sarah. The trial's our best shot. You're too caught up in Dad's sermons to see it. Neuralink's tech could." "Could what?" Sarah cut in. "Turn him into a machine. Dad believes in heaven, Mike. In Mom. You're taking that away from him." There was a pause, the silence heavy. "I'm trying to save him," Mike said, his voice breaking. "I can't lose him like we lost Mom." The vulnerability in his words caught Sarah off guard, a crack in his armor. For a moment, she saw the boy who'd held her hand at their mother's funeral, his grief as raw as hers. But the moment passed, and her resolve hardened. "I'm stopping the trial," she said. "Dad deserves to go on his terms." Mike hung up without a reply, leaving Sarah trembling in the sterile hallway. The decision felt like a leap into the unknown, a rejection of the hope Mike's science offered. But Grace's letter, her father's faith, and the memory of Montreat's chapel urged her forward. She returned to the room, where James stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice faint under the oxygen mask. "You look troubled." She forced a smile, sitting beside him. "Just figuring things out, Dad." She took his hand, its warmth a fragile anchor. "I want to do something for you. A prayer, like we used to. With Mike, too." James's eyes brightened, a spark of hope in the dim room. "Like old times," he said, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Your mother would love that." Sarah texted Mike, "Come to the hospital. We're praying for Dad. Please." She didn't expect him to come, but she had to try. For James. For Grace. For the family they'd once been. An hour later, Mike appeared, his face a mix of exhaustion and defiance. Emma arrived too, her presence a quiet comfort. The room felt sacred, the morning light softening the edges of the medical equipment. Sarah opened her mother's Bible to a passage Grace had marked, Psalm 23, and began to read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Her voice wavered, but it grew steadier with each word, a bridge to her childhood faith. James joined in, his voice weak but resolute, and Emma followed, her words tentative but sincere. Sarah's heart lifted, the prayer a moment of hope, a glimpse of the family unity her mother had cherished. She glanced at Mike, expecting resistance, but he surprised her. His lips moved, silently at first, then softly joining the prayer. His eyes were wet, his hands clasped tightly, as if grappling with something bigger than himself. The prayer ended, and the room fell silent, save for the heart monitor's steady beep. James squeezed Sarah's hand, his smile radiant despite his frailty. "That's my heaven," he said. "You two, together." Sarah's chest swelled, the hope of that moment a balm to her fractured heart. Mike's presence, his reluctant prayer, felt like a step toward healing the rift between them. She thought of Billy Graham's words from the Montreat cassette, "Family is God's gift, a glimpse of heaven on earth." For the first time in years, she felt that truth, a spark of faith rekindled by love. But the hope was fragile, quickly overshadowed by a new tension. Mike's phone buzzed, and he checked it, his face darkening. "The trial team," he muttered. "They need confirmation by noon, or Dad's out." He looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading. "You're really stopping this? You're choosing prayer over a chance to save him?" Sarah's resolve wavered, the weight of his words pressing against her newfound peace. She looked at James, his eyes closed, a serene smile lingering. Grace's letter echoed in her mind, "Love is the bridge," but so did the fear of losing her father too soon. The prayer had united them, but Mike's question reignited the chasm between faith and science. Had she made the right choice, or was she clinging to a dream while her father's life slipped away? As the morning light grew brighter, Sarah felt the leap of faith she'd taken teetering on the edge of doubt. The hospital room, once a sanctuary, was now a crucible, testing her heart, her family, and the fragile hope she'd dared to embrace. The hospital cafeteria was a blur of clattering trays and muted conversations, the smell of overcooked eggs mingling with stale coffee. Sarah sat across from Emma, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug, her mind still reeling from the morning's prayer session. The image of Mike joining in, his voice halting but present, lingered like a fragile thread of hope. But his ultimatum about the Neuralink trial, confirmation by noon, hung over her, a reminder of the chasm between them. Grace's letter and her father's faith pulled her one way, Mike's science, another. She felt like she was unraveling. Emma pushed a stack of papers across the table, her eyes bright despite the early hour. "I found something," she said, her voice cutting through Sarah's fog. "Research from my lab, studies on how belief impacts health. It's not just spiritual fluff, there's data." Sarah raised an eyebrow, skeptical but curious. "Data on faith? You sound like Mike." Emma laughed, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "Not quite. Look, they've done brain scans, fMRI, EEG, the works, on people praying or meditating. It lights up the same areas as hope, love, even resilience. Belief, whether it's in God or something else, can lower stress hormones, boost immune response. It's not a cure, but it helps patients fight longer. Your dad's faith. It's not just in his heart, it's in his body." Sarah's chest tightened, a spark of hope igniting. The idea that her father's prayers, rooted in Billy Graham's teachings, could have measurable effects felt like a bridge between the worlds tearing her apart. She thought of Grace's letter, its promise of love as a bridge to eternity, and Rachel's words in Montreat, "Science builds the walls, faith makes it a home." Could Emma's research be proof that faith and science weren't enemies? "That's incredible," Sarah said, flipping through the papers. Graphs showed brain activity, cortisol levels, survival rates. It was clinical, yet it echoed her father's sermons about hope sustaining the soul. "So, you're saying Dad's belief in heaven could actually help him?" "Exactly," Emma said, leaning forward. "It's not about heaven being real in a lab sense. It's about what believing does to him. Your mom got that, her letter talked about love carrying her through doubt. That's measurable, Sarah." The word stirred a memory. Sarah as a child, listening to James preach from Billy Graham's Peace with God, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. She'd always thought it was poetic, not practical. But Emma's research suggested otherwise, offering a lifeline to reconcile her father's faith with her own questions. The cafeteria door swung open, and Mike appeared, his SpaceX hoodie rumpled, his face drawn. He slid into the booth beside Emma, avoiding Sarah's gaze. "Trial team's pushing me," he said, his voice low. "They need an answer in 2 hours." "What's it gonna be, Sarah?" The hope from Emma's research dimmed, tension surging back. Sarah's fingers tightened around her mug. "I told you, Mike. I'm not signing Dad up for your tech experiment. He wants to trust God, not Neuralink. Mike's eyes flashed with frustration. You're ignoring facts. This trial could reduce his pain, maybe give him months. You're choosing fairy tales over his life. Sarah's throat burned, Grace's letter echoing in her mind. It's not a fairy tale to him. It's what keeps him going. You heard him pray this morning, you saw how it calmed him. Emma's got research backing that up. Mike glanced at Emma, skeptical. What, some woo-woo study on prayer? Emma didn't flinch. Not woo-woo. Science. Belief systems. Religious or not, can improve health outcomes. Your Neuralink trial might help his body, but his faith is helping his mind, his spirit. Why not both? Mike leaned back, his expression softening for the first time. You're saying, faith is like a placebo effect. More than that, Emma said. It's a force. Like love. You can't measure love in a lab, but you know it's real. Right? Mike's jaw tightened, and Sarah saw something shift in his eyes, vulnerability, raw and unguarded. I can't lose him, he said, his voice breaking. After Mom, I thought if I worked hard enough, learned enough, I could stop this. Musk's ideas, they're about beating death, not accepting it. Sarah's heart ached, seeing the boy who'd lost his mother, now fighting to save their father. Mike's obsession with science wasn't just rebellion, it was fear, dressed up in algorithms and Elon Musk quotes. For the first time, she understood his drive, and it softened her anger. Mike, she said gently, I'm scared, too. But Dad's not just a body to save. He's Dad. His faith is who he is. Mike rubbed his eyes, exhaustion etching his face. I don't know how to do this, Sarah. I don't know how to let go. The admission was a crack in the wall between them, a moment of hope that they could find common ground. Sarah reached across the table, touching his hand. We don't have to let go yet. Emma's trial, the immunotherapy, it's less invasive. It respects what Dad believes. Let's try that first. Mike nodded slowly, a reluctant agreement. But the hope flickered as his phone buzzed again, a reminder of the Neuralink deadline. They won't wait, he said, his voice flat. If we pass, the slot's gone. The tension returned, sharper now. Sarah looked at Emma, whose steady gaze anchored her, then at Mike, whose fear mirrored her own. Grace's letter, Billy Graham's words, Emma's research, they all pointed to love as the answer. But with the clock ticking, Sarah felt the weight of her choice pressing down. Could she trust faith and science to coexist, or would Mike's deadline force her to pick a side, risking the family she was fighting to save? The hospital room was a sanctuary of quiet, the afternoon light filtering through the blinds in soft, golden slants. Sarah sat by her father's bedside, her mother's Bible resting in her lap, its pages worn from her constant touch. James's breathing was labored, the oxygen mask fogging with each exhale, but his eyes held a clarity that cut through the haze of his illness. Mike stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the Asheville skyline, his phone silent for the first time in days. The tension from their cafeteria confrontation lingered, the Neuralink trial deadline looming like a storm cloud, but Sarah clung to the fragile hope sparked by Emma's research and Mike's moment of vulnerability. James stirred, his hand reaching for Sarah's. You too, he said, his voice a whisper but firm, come closer. I've got something to say. Sarah's heart clenched. She pulled her chair closer, and Mike hesitated before joining her, his usual defiance softened by exhaustion. The room felt sacred, the air thick with the weight of what might be their father's final words. I've been a preacher my whole life, James began, his eyes moving between them. Tried to follow Billy Graham's lead. Tell folks about hope, about heaven. But I learned something these past weeks. It's not just about what's up there. He tapped his chest, wincing slightly. It's about what's here. Family. You two are my heaven on earth. Sarah's throat tightened, tears welling. She thought of Grace's letter, its promise of love as a bridge to eternity, and the Montreat chapel where Billy Graham's words had echoed, "Family is God's gift, a glimpse of heaven." James's voice carried that same conviction, a sermon born not from a pulpit but from a hospital bed. "Dad," Mike said, his voice low, "I'm trying to help you. The Neuralink trial, it's a chance to keep you here, with us." James's smile was gentle but resolute. "I know, son. You've got a big heart, even if you hide it behind all that tech." He paused, catching his breath. "But I'm not afraid to go. Heaven's real to me. Your mother's there, waiting. Maybe that baby we lost, too. I want you both to know that love, it doesn't end. Not with death, not with fights." Sarah's chest ached, the hope in his words a balm to the rift between her and Mike. She saw it in her brother's eyes, too, a flicker of softening, as if their father's sermon was reaching the boy who'd once believed. The room, with its sterile walls and beeping monitors, felt transformed, a sacred space where love spoke louder than fear. Sarah squeezed James's hand, feeling the truth of Billy Graham's teachings in her father's trembling grip. Family was their glimpse of heaven, no matter what lay beyond. Mike shifted, his hands fidgeting. "Dad, I don't know if I believe in heaven. But I want to believe in us. In keeping you here." James reached for Mike's hand, his voice steady despite the effort. "Then believe in this moment, Mike. Believe in love. That's enough for now." The words hung in the air, a spark of hope that warmed the room. Sarah felt her doubts soften, her mother's letter and her father's sermon weaving a thread of faith she hadn't felt since childhood. Mike's presence, his willingness to listen, was a small miracle, a step toward the family Grace had dreamed of. For a moment, the tension of the trial, the clash of faith and science, faded, replaced by the quiet power of their father's love. But the hope was fleeting. A nurse entered, her face apologetic as she checked James's chart. "His vitals are dropping," she said softly. "We need to adjust his meds. It might make him drowsy." Sarah's stomach sank, the tension surging back. The sermon had been a gift, but it couldn't stop the cancer's march. She looked at Mike, whose face was a mask of grief and determination. "The trial," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's our last shot, Sarah. The deadline's in an hour." The room seemed to close in, the golden light now a stark reminder of time slipping away. Sarah's mind raced, torn between James's serene faith and Mike's desperate plea. Emma's research had shown belief could strengthen the body, but was it enough? Grace's letter, James's sermon, Billy Graham's words, they all pointed to love as the answer, but love couldn't sign trial papers or stop tumors. Could she risk her father's peace for a chance at more time? James's eyes fluttered, the new meds taking effect, but he managed a final whisper. "Love each other," he said, his voice fading. "That's my sermon." Sarah's tears fell, her heart caught between hope and fear. Mike's hand brushed hers, a rare gesture of connection, but his eyes were fixed on his phone, the trial's deadline ticking closer. The sermon had brought them together, if only for a moment, but the choice ahead loomed larger than ever. Sarah felt the weight of her father's words, her mother's letter, and the fragile hope of family. But as the heart monitor beeped on, she knew the next step could either heal them or break them apart. The hospital room was a quiet cocoon, the late afternoon light casting a warm glow over James's still form. Sarah sat by his bedside, her mother's Bible open to Grace's letter, its words about love and heaven a steadying force. James's final sermon had woven a fragile thread of hope, uniting her and Mike in a moment of shared faith. But the Neuralink trial deadline, now minutes away, loomed like a guillotine, threatening to sever that thread. Sarah's heart pounded as she faced the choice. Honor her father's wish to trust in heaven or grasp at Mike's scientific lifeline. James stirred, his eyes opening slowly, clouded by pain but clear with purpose. Sarah, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the heart monitor's beep. No more trials. I'm ready to see your mother. The words hit like a shockwave, a high point of tension that stole Sarah's breath. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it aloud was a gut punch. Dad, we could try Emma's immunotherapy, she said, her voice trembling. It's less invasive. It could give us more time. James shook his head, a faint smile breaking through. Time's a gift, but so is peace. I've got that now, knowing you and Mike are here. That's my heaven. Sarah's tears fell, her father's serenity both a comfort and a challenge. Grace's letter echoed in her mind, love is the bridge to eternity. Billy Graham's teachings, woven through her parents' lives, spoke of heaven as a reunion, a place where love endured. James was choosing that promise over the uncertainty of trials, and he was asking her to trust it, too. Mike stood by the window, his back to them, his silence heavy. Sarah sensed his turmoil, his fear of losing their father driving his obsession with Neuralink. The prayer session had softened him, but his text about the trial's deadline suggested he hadn't let go. She wanted to bridge the gap, to honor both her father's faith and her brother's hope, but the choice felt impossible. Emma slipped into the room, her presence a quiet anchor. She handed Sarah a folder with the immunotherapy trial details, her eyes gentle. It's ready if you want it, she said. But it's your call. Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the folder's edge. Emma's trial offered hope, a less invasive path that respected James's beliefs more than Mike's Neuralink gamble. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mike turned, his face pale, his voice low. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Her stomach dropped. What? Mike's hands fidgeted, his SpaceX hoodie wrinkled from days of stress. I funded the Neuralink trial myself. Used my startup savings. It's already in motion, Dad's enrolled unless we pull him out. The revelation was a shock, a betrayal that reignited the tension. Sarah's vision blurred with anger and hurt. You went behind my back, she said, her voice rising. After everything, Dad's sermon, Mom's letter, you still think you know better? Mike's eyes glistened, his voice breaking. I did it for him, Sarah. For us. I can't just sit here and pray while he dies. Musk's tech, it's a chance, even if it's small. Sarah's heart tore, caught between fury and empathy. She saw the fear in Mike's eyes, the same fear that had driven him to science after their mother's death. He wasn't just chasing Elon Musk's dreams, he was running from loss, trying to hold their family together in his own way. Grace's letter flashed in her mind, hold on to love. Mike's actions, reckless as they were, came from love, not betrayal. She took a deep breath, the hope of her mother's words steadying her. Mike, she said, her voice softer, I get it. You're scared. So am I. But Dad's made his choice. He wants peace, not experiments. We have to respect that. Mike's shoulders slumped, tears spilling down his cheeks. He nodded, a silent surrender, and Sarah felt a surge of relief, a moment of hope that they could honor their father together. She turned to James, whose eyes were fixed on them, a faint smile lingering. You're my kids, he whispered. That's enough. Sarah squeezed his hand, her decision settling like a stone. No trials, she said, looking at Emma, then Mike. We'll stay with him, like he wants. Emma nodded, tucking the folder away. I'll tell the team to stand down. She paused, her cross necklace catching the light. You're doing the right thing, Sarah. Love's the strongest medicine. But as the room fell quiet, a new tension crept in. Sarah's choice felt right, aligned with James's faith in Grace's legacy, but doubt lingered. What if Mike was right? What if she was giving up a chance to save him? The heart monitor's beep seemed louder, a reminder of time running out. She looked at her father, his face calm, and clung to the hope of his words, that's my heaven. But the weight of her decision pressed down, a fragile leap of faith that could either heal their family or haunt her forever. As the sun dipped below the Asheville skyline, Sarah felt the choice settle into her bones. Love had guided her, but the shadow of what might have been loomed, a tension that would follow her into the days ahead. The hospital room was bathed in the soft glow of early evening, the Asheville skyline a silhouette against a sky streaked with pink and gold. Sarah sat by her father's bedside, her hand clasped around his, the warmth of his skin a fragile tether to the life slipping away. James's breathing was shallow, the oxygen mask long removed at his request, his face serene despite the cancer's toll. Mike stood on the other side, his eyes red but steady, while Emma sat quietly in the corner, her presence a gentle anchor. The decision to forego both the Neuralink and immunotherapy trials had settled over them like a quiet tide, leaving only this moment, this farewell. Sarah's mother's Bible rested on the bed, open to Grace's letter, its words about love and heaven a guiding light through the past days. James's final sermon, echoing Billy Graham's teachings, had rooted Sarah in a renewed faith, not in certainties, but in the promise of love enduring beyond death. Mike's confession about funding the Neuralink trial had shaken her, but his presence now, his hand resting on their father's arm, was a sign of reconciliation, however fragile. James stirred, his eyes fluttering open, a faint smile curving his lips. "My kids," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "You're here. That's all I need." Sarah's throat tightened, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We're here, Dad. Always." She squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of his words, the love that had carried them through years of loss and doubt. Grace's letter, Billy Graham's sermons, the Montreat Chapel, they all converged in this moment, a glimpse of the heaven James believed in. Mike leaned closer, his voice thick. "Dad, I'm sorry. For pushing the trial, for everything. I just wanted you to stay." James's eyes softened, a tear slipping free. "You did what you thought was right, Mike. That's love. Don't be sorry for that." The room felt sacred, the air heavy with the weight of farewell. Sarah looked at Mike, seeing the boy who'd once been her protector, now humbled by grief. Emma rose, joining them at the bedside, her cross necklace glinting in the fading light. "Pastor James," she said, her voice steady, "you taught me something about faith." "Thank you." James's smile widened, a spark of his old fire. "Keep asking questions, Emma. God loves a curious heart." He turned to Sarah and Mike, his gaze encompassing them both. "Love each other. That's my last sermon." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with a bittersweet hope. She thought of Billy Graham's words from the Montreat cassette, "Family is God's gift, a glimpse of heaven on earth." In this moment, with her father's hand in hers and Mike by her side, she felt that truth. Heaven wasn't just a place, it was this love, this connection, enduring through pain and loss. Grace's letter had promised a reunion, and Sarah, for the first time in years, believed it. She could almost feel her mother's presence, waiting somewhere beyond, with the child they'd never known. The heart monitor's beep slowed, each pause stretching longer. Sarah's breath caught, a quiet tension settling over the room. She leaned forward, kissing her father's forehead, his skin cool but soft. "Go find Mom," she whispered. "We'll be okay." Mike's hand tightened on James's arm, his voice breaking. "I love you, Dad." James's eyes closed, his smile lingering as his breathing stilled. The heart monitor flatlined, a single, unending note. Sarah's tears fell, but they were not just grief, there was peace, a closure she hadn't expected. Emma reached for her hand, and Mike stepped closer, his arm brushing hers. For a moment, they were a family again, bound by love, not conflict. The nurse entered, her movements gentle as she silenced the monitor. "He's at peace," she said softly, her eyes kind. She left them alone, the room now quiet, the sunset casting a warm glow over James's still form. Sarah opened Grace's Bible, her fingers finding the letter. Hold on to love, my babies. It's the bridge to eternity. She felt it now, a certainty that her parents were together, their love unbroken. Billy Graham's teachings, woven through her father's life, had promised a heavenly reunion, and Sarah chose to trust that promise, not because she had proof, but because it gave her peace. Mike sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I thought I could save him, he said, his voice muffled. I thought science would be enough. Sarah knelt beside him, touching his shoulder. You loved him, Mike. That's what matters. He knew it. Mike looked up, his eyes wet but softer. You really believe he's, with Mom? In heaven? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. I do. Not because I know, but because I feel it. Love doesn't end, Mike. That's what Dad taught us. He exhaled, a shaky breath, and for the first time, Sarah saw a crack in his skepticism, a willingness to consider what he couldn't see. The tension of their fights, the clash of faith and science, didn't vanish, but it softened in the face of their shared loss. Emma stood nearby, her quiet presence a reminder of the bridge they'd begun to build. As they left the room, the hospital hallway felt different, less sterile, more human. Sarah carried her mother's Bible, its weight a comfort, a promise of love that would guide her forward. James's passing was a farewell, but not an end. In the glow of the Asheville sunset, Sarah felt a new beginning, a faith reborn not in certainty, but in the enduring power of family. Sarah sat at her kitchen table in Black Mountain, the morning sun spilling through the window, warming the oak floor of her childhood home. Her laptop glowed with the draft of a feature article, her first since James's passing a week ago. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of cardinals in the backyard. Her mother's Bible lay open beside her, Grace's letter tucked inside, its words about love and heaven a guiding light. The grief of losing her father was raw, but so was the peace she'd found, a faith reborn not in certainty but in the enduring power of family. The article was for the local paper, a piece Sarah had pitched to honor her father's legacy and her own journey. She typed, her fingers steady despite the ache in her heart, my father, Pastor James Thompson, lived by Billy Graham's teachings, faith in a God who promises heaven, a place where love never ends. But as his daughter, I wrestled with doubt, torn between his faith and the science my brother championed. In his final days, I learned that love, not answers, is what binds us. She paused, her eyes drifting to a photo on the wall, her parents at a church picnic, Grace's smile bright, James's arm around her. The memory of their farewell in the hospital, with Mike and Emma by her side, filled her with a bittersweet hope. James's last sermon had echoed Graham's words, family is God's gift, a glimpse of heaven on earth. Sarah felt that now, a truth that transcended her doubts about heaven's existence. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mike, coffee at 10. Got something to show you. She smiled, a flicker of warmth. Since their father's passing, Mike had been quieter, less combative, spending hours at the house sorting through James's things. The rift between them hadn't vanished, but it was healing, stitch by stitch. She typed back, sure. Meet you at the diner. Sarah returned to her article, weaving in Emma's research on belief's impact on health. Science shows that faith, whether in God, love, or family, can strengthen the body and soul, she wrote. My friend Emma, a scientist, taught me that belief lights up the brain, much like Elon Musk's Neuralink aims to enhance it. But where science builds tools, love builds meaning. The mention of Musk was deliberate, a nod to Mike's passion, but also a bridge to her father's faith. She wasn't endorsing Musk's tech, she didn't know enough to, but she saw its place in the search for truth, a search her father and mother had pursued through faith. The diner was bustling when Sarah arrived, the air thick with the scent of bacon and maple syrup. Mike sat in their usual booth, a laptop open, his SpaceX hoodie swapped for a plain sweater, a small shift that felt significant. He looked up, offering a tentative smile. Hey, he said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Found this in Dad's study. Old sermon recordings, some from Billy Graham's crusades. Thought you'd want them for your article. Sarah's heart lifted, a spark of hope in the gesture. Thanks, Mike. That means a lot. She pocketed the drive, imagining her father's voice filling the house again, weaving Graham's teachings into his own. How are you holding up? Mike shrugged, his eyes distant. Trying to figure out what's next. I stopped the Neuralink funding. Felt like the right thing, after Dad. The admission was a quiet victory, a step toward the family unity James had longed for. Sarah reached for his hand, a rare touch. You did what you thought was best. Dad knew that. So do I. Mike's eyes softened, a trace of the boy who'd once been her confidant. I'm reading his Bible, he admitted. Not sure I believe it, but I want to understand him. And Mom. The words were a gift, a bridge between their worlds. Sarah thought of Grace's letter, its promise of love as eternity's foundation, and felt a surge of hope. Her article took shape in her mind, a narrative that honored her father's faith, her mother's love, and even Mike's search for answers through science. Family is our glimpse of heaven, she wrote later, back at her keyboard, no matter what we believe. It's the love we carry, the stories we tell, the hands we hold when the end comes. As she typed, the sun climbed higher, bathing the room in light. The grief was still there, a shadow that would linger, but so was the promise of a new beginning. Sarah's faith wasn't the unshakable certainty of her childhood, but a quieter trust, in love, in family, in the possibility of heaven. Mike's willingness to read their father's Bible, to question his own skepticism, was a start. Emma's research, blending science and belief, offered a path forward. Together, they were rebuilding what loss had broken. Sarah saved her draft, her fingers hovering over the keys. The article wasn't just a story, it was a testament to her journey, a way to share the lesson she'd learned. Love was the bridge, as Grace had written, as James had preached, as Billy Graham had proclaimed. She closed her laptop, the weight of her parents' legacy a comfort, not a burden. The new beginning wasn't an end to questions, but a choice to live with them, guided by the love that had always been her family's heart. The Montreat College Library was a haven of quiet, its shelves lined with books that smelled of aged paper and wisdom. Sarah sat across from Dr. Rachel Evans, the theologian she'd met at the diner, her recorder humming softly on the table. The late afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, casting a warm glow over the wooden floors, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital where Sarah had said goodbye to her father 2 weeks ago. Her article, nearly complete, needed one final voice, Rachel's, to tie together the threads of faith, science, and family that had defined her journey. Sarah adjusted her notebook, her mother's Bible tucked beside it, Grace's letter a constant reminder of love's enduring power. Dr. Evans, she began, I'm writing about my dad, his faith, and how it clashed with my brother's belief in science. You said faith and science both seek truth. Can you explain that? Rachel leaned back, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes thoughtful. Billy Graham often said that truth is God's domain, whether it's found in a church or a lab. Faith asks why we're here, science asks how. They're two sides of the same coin, humanity's search for meaning. Love, though, is what binds them. It's what makes a family, what gives heaven its weight. Sarah's chest tightened, the words echoing her father's final sermon and Grace's letter. She thought of James's serene smile as he spoke of heaven, of Mike's reluctant prayer at his bedside, of Emma's research showing belief's tangible effects. Rachel's perspective felt like a capstone, a way to honor both her father's faith and her brother's search for answers. So, you're saying love is the bridge? She asked, scribbling notes. Exactly, Rachel said, her voice warm. Billy taught that heaven is love's ultimate promise, a reunion rooted in God's heart. Science, like Elon Musk's work, pushes boundaries, but it's love that gives those boundaries meaning. Your family's story shows that. The mention of Musk brought Mike to mind, his SpaceX hoodie and Neuralink obsession a stark contrast to this quiet library. Sarah had seen a shift in him since James's passing, his willingness to read their father's Bible, his softened edges at the diner. But doubt lingered, a quiet tension. Could he truly embrace the faith he'd rejected, or was he just grieving? Rachel seemed to sense her thoughts. "You're worried about your brother, aren't you?" she asked gently. "He's wrestling with the same questions you are." "That's a start." Sarah nodded, a spark of hope igniting. "He's trying. He stopped the Neuralink trial, started reading Dad's Bible. But he's still Mike. Stubborn, skeptical." Rachel smiled. "Skepticism's not the enemy." Billy Graham welcomed questions, they led him deeper into faith. "Give your brother time. Love will guide him, just like it's guiding you." The words were a balm, easing the tension in Sarah's heart. She thought of Grace's letter, "Hold on to love, my babies. It's the bridge to eternity." Rachel's insight mirrored that promise, offering a vision of family that could hold both faith and science. Sarah's article took its final shape in her mind, a story not of answers, but of love as the thread weaving her family's journey together. As they wrapped up, Rachel handed Sarah a book, Billy Graham's Angels, with a note tucked inside, for Sarah and Mike. "Keep seeking truth." Sarah thanked her, the library's warmth lingering as she stepped outside into Montreat's crisp air. The Blue Ridge Mountains loomed, their peaks a reminder of the road trip with her father, the chapel where his faith had felt so alive. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mike, "Found something in Dad's study. Meet me at the house." Curiosity piqued, Sarah drove to Black Mountain, the familiar roads winding past churches and farmland. The house was quiet, the scent of James's rose garden drifting through an open window. Mike sat at the kitchen table, a leather journal in his hands, his face a mix of awe and uncertainty. "Dad's," he said, sliding it toward her. "His last entries. He wrote about us, about Mom, about heaven. He believed we'd find our way, together." Sarah opened the journal, her father's handwriting a jolt to her heart. "Sarah and Mike are my legacy," he'd written. "They'll fight, but they'll love. That's heaven's promise," like Billy said. Tears welled, but so did a shock, a twist she hadn't expected. Mike, the skeptic, was reading these words, grappling with their father's faith. "You're really into this?" she asked, her voice soft. Mike shrugged, a faint smile breaking through. "I don't know what I believe yet. But Dad did. Mom did. I want to understand why." The revelation was a quiet earthquake, a sign that Mike was opening to the faith he'd once mocked. The tension of their past fights didn't vanish, but it softened, replaced by the hope of a shared journey. Sarah closed the journal, her article complete in her mind, a story of love bridging faith and science, family and loss, earth and heaven. As she drove home, the mountains glowed under a starlit sky, a canvas of possibility. Sarah felt her parents' presence, their love guiding her forward. "What's one lesson from this story that resonates with you?" she imagined asking her readers, her voice echoing the engagement prompt from her videos. Share below. The question wasn't just for them, it was for her, a call to keep seeking, keep loving, keep believing in the heaven her family had shown her. The Black Mountain Community Center was alive with chatter and the clink of coffee mugs, its wooden beams adorned with fairy lights for the evening's memorial event. Sarah stood at the podium, her mother's Bible in one hand, her father's journal in the other, their words a steadying force. A month had passed since James's passing, and Sarah's article, Faith, Science, and the Heaven of Family, had gone viral, resonating with readers across North Carolina and beyond. Tonight, she was hosting a gathering to honor her father's legacy, blending his faith with the questions she'd wrestled with, a tribute to the love that had carried her through. The room was filled with familiar faces, church members who'd heard James preach, neighbors who'd tended his roses, and Emma, whose quiet presence anchored Sarah. Mike stood near the back, his usual hoodie replaced by a button-up shirt, a small but telling shift. The air smelled of homemade apple pie and pine, a quintessentially Southern gathering that felt like an extension of the Thompson family's warmth. Sarah took a deep breath, her heart racing with a familiar tension. Speaking publicly about her journey felt like exposing a raw wound, especially with Mike watching, his own path to faith still uncertain. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice steadying as she spoke. "My father, Pastor James Thompson, lived by Billy Graham's teachings, faith in a God who promises heaven, a place where love endures. But he also taught me that heaven isn't just out there, it's in the love we share, the families we build." The crowd nodded, some wiping tears, others clutching hymnals. Sarah opened her mother's Bible, reading from Grace's letter, "Hold on to love, my babies. It's the bridge to eternity." She glanced at Mike, whose eyes glistened, a flicker of the boy who'd once believed. "My brother, Mike, and I fought over how to save Dad, faith versus science, prayers versus trials. But we learned that love is what binds them, what makes a family whole." The word stirred a spark of hope, a reminder of the prayer session that had united them in James's final moments. Sarah shared Emma's research, explaining how belief, whether in God or family, could strengthen the body and soul. "Science, like Elon Musk's Neuralink, pushes boundaries," she said, nodding to Mike, "but love gives those boundaries meaning. That's what Dad taught us, what Mom wrote about, what Billy Graham preached." Emma stepped forward, her cross necklace catching the light, and shared a brief talk on her lab's findings, bridging the spiritual and scientific. The crowd listened, rapt, as she echoed Rachel Evans's wisdom, "Faith and science both seek truth. Love is what makes it personal." Sarah felt a swell of gratitude, the hope of reconciliation growing stronger. The memorial wasn't just for James, it was a new beginning, a way to carry his legacy forward. Mike approached the podium, a surprise that tightened Sarah's chest with fresh tension. He hadn't planned to speak, and his presence here, in front of their father's congregation, felt like a leap. "I'm not much for sermons," he said, his voice rough but earnest, "but Dad was. He believed in heaven, in Mom waiting there. I didn't get it for a long time. I thought science, Neuralink, SpaceX, all that, could fix everything. But Dad's journal, Mom's letter, they're making me rethink things." The room was silent, the weight of Mike's words a shock to Sarah and the crowd. He pulled out a small card, one of James's sermon notes, and read, "Billy Graham said, heaven is real because God keeps his promises. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. For Dad. For us." Sarah's tears fell, a mix of pride and relief. Mike's admission was a crack in his skepticism, a step toward the faith he'd rejected. The tension of their past fights didn't vanish, but it softened, replaced by the hope of a shared journey. The crowd applauded softly, some whispering prayers, others nodding in understanding. Sarah hugged Mike, feeling the warmth of their father's love in the embrace, a glimpse of the heaven James had promised. As the event ended, Sarah stood outside under the starlit sky, the Blue Ridge Mountains a dark silhouette. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. Emma joined her, her smile gentle. "You did good tonight," she said. "Your dad would be proud." Sarah nodded, clutching the Bible and journal. "I feel him here. And Mom. Like they're watching." She thought of Grace's letter, James's final sermon, Billy Graham's teachings, a legacy of love that had guided her through doubt to this moment of peace. Mike stepped beside her, his hands in his pockets. "I'm keeping Dad's journal," he said quietly. "Maybe I'll find what he saw in it." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "You will. Love's the answer, Mike. Always was." The night stretched on, a canvas of possibility. Sarah's journey had taught her that faith and science weren't enemies, that family was the true bridge. "What's one way love has carried you through a tough time?" she imagined asking her readers, her voice echoing the engagement prompt from her videos. Share below. The question was for them, but also for her, a call to keep loving, keep seeking, keep believing in the heaven her family had shown her. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?